Hi, let me be the 473rd person to wish you a Happy New Year. There wasn't a video last week because I just did a short talk at a United service. It was full of stories you'll have heard before on this channel. I didn't think it would really add anything to include it. This weekend I'm doing a covenant service, as is often the case at the beginning of January in a Methodist church, and I often get this feeling that because of the covenant service, Methodists miss out a bit on the Feast of Epiphany, the arrival of the Magi to visit the young Jesus. But I think you can combine the two. I think the Magi are a really useful theme for covenant. So let's read their story. Matthew 2, verses 1 to 12. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. So rumour has it that the nativity play was cancelled at Parliament this Christmas. Apparently they couldn't find three wise men. Sure, yeah, silly old joke for the festive season, along with that cartoon where instead of three wise men, you get three wise women bringing practical gifts such as a casserole instead of gold, frankincense and myrrh. But as I said before the reading, I love the story of the Magi, and I really think we can make this connection between this story of the Messiah being revealed to the Gentiles with the commitments that we think about in the Methodist covenant service. So I'm going to share three aspects of the Magi and their coming that speak to the question of our commitment to Christ. Firstly, the Magi were Gentiles. Yeah, I know, I'm stating the obvious, aren't I? But it's important. Matthew is the most Jewish of all the four Gospels, but no Jew comes to worship the infant Christ in Matthew. Only the Magi from the east. Not sure where they were from. One theory says modern-day Iraq. The Magi represent all that is wrong in spiritual practice in the eyes of faithful Jews. They were astrologers. Astrology began in ancient Babylon. When Israel was taken captive there, astrology was a common local habit. In the parts of Isaiah's prophecy that relate to Israel being in exile, astrology is ridiculed. It's not the way you find truth and purpose in life. Really, on that evidence, no Jew would call these people wise men. They were fools. And the Jew would say you only would find God and truth by listening to his word. It's why no Christian should devote time to their horoscope. These people are fools. Oh, and by the way, they're not kings either. Because if they were kings coming to another king, they wouldn't bow down. They would be coming to an equal. So, no, they're not that. We'll come to who they were, perhaps, but they're not goodies in the sight of good, faithful Jewish people. They're unsound, they're unclean. Yet these are the people who, according to Matthew, come and worship the infant Christ. Matthew is telling us here that the message of Jesus is for the whole world. And even if Jesus' own ministry is pretty much confined to the borders of Israel, when you get right to the end of his gospel, he gives the Great Commission and sends his disciples where? Into the whole world. And therefore, what I'm trying to highlight here from the story of the Magi is that our call to be bearers of the gospel is to all people. It includes those who are not remotely like us. It includes those people we might write off or despise, those people whose lifestyles we would condemn, because Christ lived and died for them too. Those people we wouldn't want to associate with, the folk you'd avoid at a social gathering. Christ lived and died for them. In one of my previous appointments, I noticed from a Facebook group that one of the most contentious issues among the residents of that village had to do with what happened when travellers came and pitched up on land in the village. And I can understand some of that reaction. Some of the so-called travellers would come and they would leave a terrible mess where they'd been. They would have dogs out barking all times of the day and night. The same dogs would probably be very aggressive. There will be stories of thefts from shops in the villages and all that. Sort of people you don't like. And you can understand those feelings. But there is an amazing story going on among the gypsies and the travellers in this country, and I think into Europe as well, where the gospel in recent years has been spreading like wildfire. There are indigenous gypsy congregations and indigenous traveller Christian conventions. Are they our Magi? There will be other groups too. Who are the ones we might think are unsavoury, but who need God's love in Christ? Is it at this new year, at a renewal of a covenant, a time when God speaks to us and says, there are people you may not like much, but who need God's love? Secondly, the Magi decided to go. They are people of action. They go on this long and arduous journey. When they arrive in Jerusalem, making the mistake of thinking, we're going to see a king, let's go to the king's palace. Whoops, they end up with Herod. Herod calls in the biblical scholars, and the biblical scholars give all the right answers. Yeah, we could tick that box. The Messiah will be born in Bethlehem. But do the biblical scholars do anything about it? No. Those who know the scriptures do nothing. You see, Christian commitment involves hearing the call of God, hearing his word, and then actually doing something about it. The Magi demonstrate it in spades. They don't even know the scriptures, but they follow the call as they have heard it the best they can. This strange sign of the star, this reference from Micah, which gets quoted slightly differently from its original text, the warning in the dream not to return to Herod. The Magi go in response to all these messages. Sometimes we're a bit too much like those biblical scholars whom Herod calls. We've heard the Christian message so many times. We've read it over and over. But do we allow it to have that transforming and challenging effect on us, or has familiarity bred contempt? Do we just read it and then close the book? That's why I love the story of the Argentinian pastor who kept preaching on the same text every week for a whole year to his congregation. And of course, eventually someone said to him, "Pastor, when are you going to preach on something different?" And he said, "I'll preach something different when you start obeying this." And that can be our problem. We're fed the diet of weekly sermons. We think we know our Bible and our faith quite well. But have we let it change us and move us into action? Look at the Magi. For all their learning, because alongside their wacky occult beliefs in astrology, they're also probably the elite civil service of the day. Back in the book of Daniel himself becomes head of the Magi. These are the senior civil servants of the ancient world. They're the Oxbridge class in that respect. All that learning, when it comes to faith and action, they're pretty simple, straightforward. God shows them what to do. Off they go. Their learning doesn't become justifications for doing nothing. They do it. Sometimes, it's newer and spiritually younger Christians who come along, get hold of something basic about the faith, and they run with it, while we experienced Christians just sit there. I came across a wonderful example of this a few years ago. I was involved in the launch of what was the first food bank in Surrey, in a place that was one of the most needy areas of Surrey. You might think there aren't needy areas in Surrey. There are. Person who had the vision to start the food bank was a new Christian. She was, perhaps in her 40s. She had attended an Alpha course that one of the local churches had put on in a cafe. She'd found faith in Jesus, and she very quickly understood that if you follow Jesus, you care about the poor. And so she quickly came to her church leaders and said, "Could we set up a food bank?" And she used all her professional skills. She had done all sorts of high-powered jobs. She'd been a stockbroker, managing multi-million-pound budgets and all sorts. And she drove the vision, started the food bank. A few years later, the Trussell Trust that runs the majority of food banks in the UK, she went and started working for them in a senior national role. But you see, she was young in the faith, but she got it, and she ran with it. What more might we do if we allowed ourselves to be that little bit less jaded about all the things we've heard over and over again in the scriptures and in the preaching of the word? Is there one thing God's been prompting you about for ages? Has he been giving you a poke? Wouldn't now, with renewing our covenant before God, be a great time finally to say yes to him? And I won't sit on my backside anymore. I'll do it. So, the Magi were Gentiles. They're part of the despised people, but God loved them. the Magi decided to go. They got on with putting faith into action. Thirdly and finally, the Magi decided to give. They're Gentiles, they go, they give. 3 G's. So, yeah, the giving. Yeah, sure. We're into the gold, frankincense and myrrh here, not a casserole dish in sight. Now, you'll know the popular idea that gold is for a king, frankincense for a priest, and myrrh to mark death. What a nice 3-point sermon. Sure, in a way it fits with what comes later in Jesus' ministry. But Matthew makes no such connections. This interpretation arose in the 2nd century, courtesy of a famous church leader called Irenaeus. But in the text of Matthew, these are simply extravagant gifts who are fit for the true King of the Jews. It's as simple as that. The King of the Jews will come to be seen in Matthew as the King of all creation, and he's worthy of our extravagant giving. Yeah, the gifts they present are worth a lot of money. They come on the back of the immense giving of time and energy that the Magi have put in to coming this great distance just to spend a few minutes kneeling at the feet of a baby. Perhaps we've become jaded in that area of giving too. We give our time and our energy to Jesus and the church, and sometimes we're doing it, but it feels no different from involvement in a social activity or a hobby. The giving of our money sometimes just feels like a subscription to a favourite cause. It's just another standing order coming out of our bank account. Maybe that's where the younger Christians can help us. Again, they're often very passionate, but also very inelegant and unsophisticated in their worship and their giving. And it's a bit crude and clumsy at times. Maybe we look down and say, oh, that's a bit uncouth. Maybe we damn them with faint praise. But rather than being cynical like that, maybe they should challenge us to freshen up our own discipleship and our giving. I think the thing to remember is that the Magi opened their treasure box and brought out the gold, frankincense, and myrrh. They opened their treasures, says Matthew. And we need to open our treasures to give to Jesus, the things that are precious to us. And we say, Jesus, here it is, it's for you. What will you do with it? And he wants to refresh that. And refresh our giving in that way, to take that step of offering our treasures. He loves us so much. He's not just snatching things and being severe with us. So much more I could say about the Magi. Maybe on this treasures thing, the thing I just observe is that another theory about where the Magi come from is that they might come from Nabatea. And that's a place where the economy was based a lot on, guess what? Frankincense. No wonder they're opening their treasures. What is it that's close to us that we offer? You know, Matthew tells us so much in those 12 short verses. Look how the Magi change. Compare them at the beginning of the account arriving through the dubious offices of astrology. But by the time they leave the biblical account, they have listened to Scripture, they have met Jesus, they've listened to God in a dream. They're different. Are we open to being changed today too? Who are our Gentiles, our despised people who need the good news? Or are we just sermon tasters, theoretical Bible students, like the scholars whom Herod called? Or are we like the Magi, those who will go, who will put what we've heard into action? And as we give generously, extravagantly of our treasures, are we doing that knowing that the one we're coming to is himself the greatest giver of all? Each of us needs to be changed. So may we be open this new year and at a covenant service, if we're going to one, to that transforming, changing power of Jesus through his Spirit. There you go. Happy New Year. Hope to see you next week. God bless.